Hello viewers, welcome to the Krasmodo channel. How old do you think the concept of personal electric mobility is? 10, 20, 50 years. In reality, this concept is just over 150 years old. With the advent of the first bicycles in the 19th century, engineers' minds were immediately filled with thoughts about what could be invented to make the bicycle move on its own. The concept of the electric motorcycle was first patented in France, and within a short period of time, as many as 3 patent applications were filed. Here, for example, is the patent drawing by Joseph Marie from April 28, 1869, which describes in detail an electric motor for driving the magnet of an electric bicycle. In the patent by Louis-Guillaume Perrault, from 1871, there were also considerations about the possibility of using an electric motor. And here is the electric tricycle by Gustave Trouve, the first actually built electric car, or motorcycle if you prefer. It was demonstrated to the public on April 19, 1881. Where am I going with this? All these inventors are united by their passion for electric transport, and in this story I want to focus on one such person and the electric vehicle he created. This person is the Briton Clive Sinclair, and his creation is a 3-wheeled electric car called the Sinclair C5. By the way, the Sinclair C5 was the most successful electric car of the 80s and the most mass-produced electric car until the 2000s. We'll talk about the fate of this vehicle. Enjoy watching. A little about Clive Sinclair. Clive is a very knowledgeable and far-sighted person. He was one of the pioneers of personal computers in the 60s and 70s. Since his teenage years, Sinclair had been thinking about small and inexpensive electric personal vehicles. At the same time, he earned a reputation as an electronics genius and developed the first slim pocket calculators. When it came to vehicles, the car seemed extremely wasteful and expensive to him in 90% of its everyday use cases. In his spare time away from his main work in electronics, Clive and his company tested electric motors and batteries, while Chris Carey, who would later become the founder of the computer company Acorn, did preliminary work on prototypes. The first experiment in the early 70s was an electric motor mounted on a scooter. Sinclair believed that new electric vehicles needed to be designed from scratch, rather than adapting ideas developed around internal combustion engines. His first electric car prototype, the Sinclair C1979, was a small single-seater vehicle using existing lead-acid battery technology with a range of 48 kilometers, a weight of 136 kilograms, and a modest price. Sinclair signed a contract with Ogley Design to develop the exterior design of the car. The development turned out to be expensive, and in the spring of '83, Clive decided to abandon the C1 project. A small clarification, in fact, Sinclair's electric vehicle is a tricycle. You can classify it as both a motorcycle and a car. This won't significantly affect the narrative. The failure of the first project couldn't shake Clive Sinclair's ideas. He sells part of his shares and establishes Sinclair Vehicles, hiring Barry Wills, the former head of DeLorean, as managing director. Although the idea of an electric car was clearly ahead of its time, British legislation supported electric vehicles. In 1980, taxes on electric cars were abolished, and in 1983, a new law was passed allowing people as young as 14 to drive vehicles with a maximum speed of less than 24 kilometers per hour without a helmet or a driver's license. Sinclair felt that he had found a niche they could fill. Clive Sinclair's new concept was a small, inexpensive electric tricycle weighing about 40 kilograms for one person, which also had pedals in case the battery ran out. Sinclair once again hired Ogley Design to develop the initial concept. After the Ogley prototype, It was handed over to Lotus Cars Limited to develop the chassis and control components. However, there were things Sinclair disliked. He assigned his employee, 23-year-old industrial designer Gas Desbarat, to complete the project. The electric tricycle turned into a futuristic mini-rocket with a die-cast plastic body. Although the body was plastic, underneath it was a chassis made of steel tubes. There was no real suspension. The whole concept was to create a vehicle that was cheap to produce and easy to use. According to Desbarat himself, his job was to turn an ugly, pointless device into a more beautiful, safer, and more convenient to use pointless device. In fact, the Sinclair C5 was an extremely dangerous vehicle on public roads. The C5 did not have a seatbelt. Mirrors were only optional, and due to its small size, there was a high risk that drivers of regular cars simply might not notice this little vehicle in traffic. Sinclair C5 components were made by different companies. Linpack made the plastic body, Lotus the chassis, Philips the electric motor, and Oldham the lead-acid battery. A deal was made with the Hoover washing machine factory in Wales for the mass production of the C5. Clive Sinclair's ambitions were enormous. He planned to produce 200,000 three-wheeled electric vehicles per year, and he spared no expense on development, just like Elon Musk. Before the official presentation of the C5 in January 1985, 2,500 units were built to meet the expected demand. The Sinclair C5 was unveiled at a lavish press reception at Alexandra Palace. Since it was cold, most of the C5s refused to work properly and the batteries drained quickly. The testers of the new product, who were also journalists, were horrified when they went out on the road and encountered trucks that couldn't see them and spewed exhaust fumes right into their faces. There was no protection from the elements, so the testers were freezing and got soaked. In short, the premiere turned out to be a disaster, and the bad news kept coming. Magazines and newspapers expressed concern about the lack of any protective equipment, the C5 being invisible to many drivers, and the absence of requirements for training, licenses, or helmets for riders. The 250-watt electric motor wasn't enough for any incline, and the battery would run out after 10 to 18 kilometers, which was much lower than the claimed 48. The situation would have been acceptable if the C5 had been positioned as a toy, but no. Clive Sinclair seriously believed that this was a revolutionary device that would transform personal mobility. The revolution didn't happen at that time. The C5 turned out to be a failure. In the first 2 months, 5,000 C5 tricycles were sold, including to Princes William and Harry. By August 1985, 14,000 units had been produced, and the company Sinclair Vehicles went bankrupt. The remaining vehicles were sold off by third-party organizations. Over time, the Sinclair C5 became a collector's item. Some users went to the trouble of installing a more powerful engine and higher capacity batteries. And the daredevil Alan Harper in 2004 upgraded his C5 and set a speed record of 241 kilometers per hour. Despite the failure, Sinclair's creation turned out to be the most successful individual electric vehicle of the 80s and remained the most widespread until the 2000s. And it's important to realize that the overall movement of technological progress consists of many attempts by engineers, designers, and enthusiasts, and these attempts are far from always successful. Such is the story of the personal electric vehicle Sinclair C5. This brings my story to an end. Thank you very much for your attention. The topic of electric motorcycles is quite interesting, and I think in the future I should make a big feature about it. If you like the idea, give it a thumbs up and leave a comment to show your support. This was Crass Moto Channel. See you next time.